And we're back! Thanks for coming back for more of the Flow Arts Institute safety training video for fire safety personnel. We've got quite a bit more information to cover, but it's like the old joke that goes, how do you eat an elephant? The answer is one bite at a time. The good thing about this video format is that you can stop, rewind, and replay the information again and again. Alright, let's get started with the next section. Let's talk about fire extinguishing theory. If you had the opportunity to tune into the first few videos of this series, you've got a pretty good idea of what it takes to create a fire. As a review, the components of the fire triangle are fuel, oxygen, and heat. Now the fire tetrahedron, which describes what it takes to keep a fire going, adds an additional variable to the mix, the chemical chain reaction. Once you understand that removing one of the sides of the fire tetrahedron is essential to extinguishing flame, you've got the basic tool that you need to extinguish almost any flame. To put it succinctly, to extinguish anything, remove either fuel, oxygen, heat, or interrupt the chain reaction that perpetuates the chemical reaction that we know as fire. However, as a point of warning, remember that anything, including fire-resistant clothing, can become fuel with enough oxygen and heat. As an academic exercise, let's take a bit more of an in-depth look at the two methods that are commonly used to extinguish fire props or fire performers. The use of a fire suppression cloth, such as Duvetyne, and the use of a fire extinguisher. Duvetyne. When used correctly, Duvetyne removes the component of oxygen from the fire tetrahedron. Then there's the damp towel. Like Duvetyne, the damp towel also removes oxygen from the fire tetrahedron, but in addition, it decreases the heat of the entire chemical reaction, certainly not below some of the flash points of fuel that we're dealing with, but still lower than previous to its use. And in addition, the water in the damp towel may disperse some of the chemical reactants in the chain reaction of the fire tetrahedron. So fire extinguishers are next. An ABC rated powder extinguisher, which contains monoammonium phosphate, has several actions in abating fire. Primarily, it interrupts the chemical reaction, but has other actions such as preventing oxygen from reaching the fuel and covering the fuel source as well. Now, a BC rated carbon dioxide extinguisher also acts on two legs of the fire tetrahedron. The carbon dioxide gas displaces oxygen from the local environment. And in addition, the temperature of the carbon dioxide lowers the heat of the reaction well below the flash points of most of the fuels, regardless of the fire performance fuel that we're using. Remember here that the temperature of the carbon dioxide extinguisher is close to negative 100 degrees Fahrenheit. So let's next talk about fire abatement using fire-resistant cloth. In general, if we're using cloth to abate fire, we're wanting to remove the oxygen from the fire tetrahedron. Now this is the same concept as using a candle snuffer to snuff out a candle flame. Keeping this fact in mind, it's easy to understand existing methods of fire prop extinguishing, as well as adapt these methods for new and unusual fire performance props. So let's get to the specifics of extinguishing fire props using fire-resistant cloth. In this section, we'll go over extinguishing a few different types of props. Now here's what you'll need. Personal protective equipment, which includes fire-resistant gloves and eye protection. Heavyweight, tightly woven fire-resistant cloth, such as Duvetyne or a damp towel or a tightly woven wool blanket. And access to a fire extinguisher, either ABC or a BC rated extinguisher. So, let's talk about all fire props that you can directly contact the entire wick. To extinguish the flame, wrap the cloth tightly around the entire wick to seal out oxygen, pat the bundle to further evacuate the oxygen, and then wait. And then continue to wait, because you're waiting for all the oxygen to be used up. Unwrap the prop carefully when you think it's extinguished, keeping your face away from the prop, as flare-ups can and often happen. Now, for fire props that you cannot directly contact the wick, such as in the instance of caged wicks, Wrap the cloth tightly around the cage, being careful not to contact the hot metal cage, and then wrap another cloth tightly around the cage. And then wait. And then wait some more. And did I mention wait? You're waiting for all the oxygen to be used up, and there might be a lot of it, really depending on the size of the cage. When you feel that the prop is extinguished, unwrap the prop carefully, keeping your face away from the prop, as again, flare-ups can and do happen. So let's talk about some difficult fire props. For those fire props where there's too much wick or too much fire for the available amount of fire-resistant cloth, if the prop absolutely needs to be extinguished, consider putting the entire prop in an airtight, fire-resistant container. For instance, in trying to extinguish a fire jump rope, use a small steel trash can with a tight-fitting lid. The smaller the volume of free air space in the container, the quicker the extinguishing will be. And finally, let's also remember that sometimes the best way to extinguish a prop is really just to let it burn up its fuel supply. Of course, this requires that the prop is on a non-flammable, heat-resistant surface and that it's not in danger of catching other objects or people on fire. This method is often the safest method for large, sturdy props which are difficult to extinguish in other ways. Okay, so let's talk about the use of fire extinguishers in the fire performance environment. If you've had the opportunity to watch our video on fire suppression using fire extinguishers, you've already got a good idea of the different classes of fire extinguishers, what types of materials they're capable of putting out, and how to use them. Let's now talk about when to use them in a fire performance or practice environment. Now, fire extinguishers containing water or compressed extinguishing agents are generally not first-line agents for the extinguishing of fire performance props or people, unless there is no other safer or easier way of extinguishing. However, they are your first choice for extinguishing out-of-control fuel fires, such as a fuel depot fire, as well as structural fires. If you must extinguish a fire prop with a fire extinguisher, consider using a carbon dioxide BC rated extinguisher. It doesn't leave a residue which can affect the wicks of your fire prop. And for small fuel fires, a carbon dioxide BC rated extinguisher is actually preferred, as you may actually be able to salvage the remaining fuel once the fire is out. However, for large fuel fires, and especially for any type of structural fire, a dry chemical ABC extinguisher is preferred. Remember, if the structural fire is too large for your fire extinguishing capability, or simply out of reach, it's time to activate your local fire department. The next topic is both simple and controversial. Simple because the same principles of removing one or more sides of the fire tetrahedron also apply to the abatement of fire on a person or their clothing. It's controversial because there are many procedures out there, ranging from using a person's name, to using a safe word, to using a damp towel rather than Duvetyne. Let me describe what I think is the most effective method. So first, get the attention of the fire performer. Once you've identified a fire performer who has fire burning on themselves or their skin, the first step is to get their attention. Generally, the most effective way is to call their name loudly. Another reason to get acquainted with your fire performers, right? If you didn't know their name, consider shouting the name of their prop. Second, give the fire performer the location of the fire. The next word out of your mouth should be the location of the unwanted fire on the performer's body. Use words such as back, or hand, or leg. If you have the time, you can specify the side as well. Third, give the fire performer a chance to self-extinguish. Often, once notified of the fire on their person, a fire performer can simply pat out a minor fire if they can reach it. Sometimes, if their clothing fabric is of sufficient fiber and weave, the fire can self-extinguish, although time is of the utmost importance. Give the performer a few seconds to attempt to self-extinguish the fire. Fourth, if the self-extinguishing has failed, it's time to go in. If you can't get the performer's attention, or they can't self-extinguish the fire, or if the situation is complex, it's time to move in. Start by holding onto your fire retardant cloth and then consider whether or not you need your fire extinguisher. Approach the performer, being careful of your footing. When in hearing range, ask the performer loudly to stop manipulating their fire performance prop and either drop the props to the ground if they're on fire-resistant ground, or hold them away from their body. Once they've done those steps, move in swiftly to manage the fire. Step 5. Extinguish the fire, using fire-resistant cloth. Now remember, most fires on the person or clothing can be extinguished by removing the oxygen in the fire tetrahedron. To do so, simply wrap the fire retardant cloth around the burning area. If the fire is large, it may take multiple layers to accomplish this task.
Hey, Zan, I think you're on fire.
Help! Help!
Okay. Here we go. Looks good. See you soon.
Now there are special cases to watch for here, so let's discuss them briefly. There's the possibility of pressing superheated clothing against the skin, worsening the existing burn. In addition, the burning wick may be trapped against the skin or the clothing. And finally, the clothing may have absorbed enough fuel from the wick of the fire prop to act as its own fuel source. If this is the case, do your best to isolate the superheated or fueled clothing or the burning wick within the fire retardant cloth and pulling it away from the skin. So there's an alternate step 5, and I call it the last ditch step 5. Extinguish the fire with other methods. There's certainly other methods that can be useful for fire abatement on a person or their clothing or their hair. The old adage of stop, drop, and roll is useful to get away from a burning fire prop, but is specifically only useful if the ground isn't flammable, the way is clear of other hazards such as performers or fuel, and if the flaming prop isn't attached to the performer. Unfortunately, if the fire has enough fuel, this method may take a while to deprive the fire of enough oxygen and chain reactants to extinguish the fire. Now you should be aware that the use of a fire extinguisher on a burning human is fraught with danger. As an example, the chemical fire extinguishers, such as the ABC dry powder extinguishers, are irritating to the lungs and the mucous membranes, including the eyes, nose, and mouth. Now the CO2 extinguishers are not only extremely cold at approximately -100 degrees Fahrenheit, which can cause frostbite in seconds, but they can also displace enough oxygen to cause a temporary loss of consciousness due to asphyxiation. Now that being said, in the face of a true fire emergency, the use of a fire extinguisher on a person may be warranted to save their life. If you're going to use one, use as little as possible of the extinguishing agent to extinguish the fire. So let's talk about some after-extinguishing considerations. After the fire performer is extinguished, if any injury has occurred, other than, let's say, the injury to their ego, please strongly consider referring the performer to the appropriate medical personnel. Check on the mental status of the performer. And are you okay? Question may suffice, or they may actually need a more formal evaluation. If they seem to be all right, it's allowable to let them return to spinning, But if they appear visibly shaken, it may be best to recommend that they stop performing for the time being until they recover mentally and physically. Because this is such an important topic to be done right, let's go over the steps again. So number 1, get the attention of the fire performer. Number 2, give the fire performer the location of the fire. Number 3, give the fire performer a chance to self-extinguish. Number 4, if the self-extinguishing has failed, it's time to move in. And number 5, extinguish the fire using fire-resistant cloth. And as a last resort, you could try extinguishing the fire with other methods, such as stop, drop, and roll, or a fire extinguisher. And at the end, consider some of the after-extinguishing considerations. Alright, well, we're not quite done with the fire safety personnel safety training video, but now's a good time to take a break. We've covered quite a bit of information already, so give your brain a rest, take care of your body's needs, and start up again when you're ready. Thanks for watching this far, and I hope you'll come back for the next part of our series. For the Flow Arts Institute, I'm Dr. Howard Shen.